In the summer of 1999, I learned a very important life lesson, and I've tried to carry it with me as one of the principles or values by which I live my life. That summer, it was very exciting for me because I was in seminary in my second year, my final year of seminary, working on my master's degree. And also, I was in love with my girlfriend, who is now my wife. We would get married about 6 months later or so. At the seminary where I was doing my master's degree, I worked as an office assistant for one of the professors. And his specialty was Islamic studies and how to minister to Muslims. Right next door to our office was another professor who was incredibly respected in his field of study. I don't know how many books he had written. He had taught or lectured in some of the most prestigious universities and seminaries in the country. Very well respected as a scholar there at the seminary and just as a Christian man in general. Well, one day I bumped into this man in the hall, and I was just very flattered that he would take time to have a very casual, friendly, and kind conversation with me. He just started asking me about what I was doing, what I planned to do, future plans, asked me about my girlfriend. I told him we were getting married. Just very, very nice. And I was just so flattered and so humbled that he would take time to have that conversation with me. Well, at some point in the conversation, he said, "Hey, by the way, I hear that the professor you're working for is working on a book. He's writing a book on how to evangelize or how to minister to Muslims." And I said, "Yes, he's working on it, and it should be done pretty soon, actually." And he said, "Listen, do you think I can get a copy of the outline of the book? I'm going to get the book when it's available, but I just want to begin familiarizing myself with the topic because I know nothing about that." I said, "Absolutely, I'll be sure to get that to you." And then for a moment, he was, contemplating or thinking. And he said something, and I'm not sure if he was speaking out loud and he was telling himself, or if he was telling me, or some combination of the two, I don't know. But he said this, just very sincerely, very humbly. He said, "There's still so much to learn, isn't there?" Now, I agreed politely, but he was just saying something. And he had just dropped some incredible knowledge on me at that moment. But at my 24 years old, I really wasn't aware of what he was telling me, of the importance of what he was telling me. It would take me several years to understand what he was saying, because at that time, when I was 24 years old, I had a pretty serious problem. And what's sad is that at my 24 years old, I didn't realize that I had a problem, let alone how serious that problem was. And it wouldn't be till many years later that I would recognize that I had a very serious problem. See, at that time, my problem was that I thought I knew it all. Because after all, I had graduated with a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. I had taken a year of biblical Greek in my bachelor's studies. I had taken theology courses, biblical studies courses. Here I was in my second year as a master's degree student. Now I had 2 years of Greek, some Hebrew, more theology, more Bible. So of course, I knew it all. And I was in school. I was getting a degree just as a formality because I already knew everything that there was to know. That was my huge problem, that I thought I knew it all. And many years later, as I reflected on that conversation, which, by the way, I will never forget that conversation. As I reflected on that conversation with that man, I began to realize, I began to understand just the wisdom of that man. And I began to realize what knowledge he had just dropped on me, the wisdom he had dropped on me on that very casual, very brief conversation that he probably doesn't even remember that he had with me. But he taught me a lot. It would take me a while to figure that out, but thankfully I learned that lesson. What makes what he said all the more impressive is the fact that at the time, he was 82 years old. 82 years old. I estimate that he had been teaching for, 50 years maybe? Something like that. And he would die a year later after he and I had that conversation. But near the end of his life, after all his teaching, all his studies, all his writing, he had come to this conclusion. There's still so much to learn. I mean, you would think a man at that age with that resume that he had wouldn't have come to that conclusion, but here's what I discovered. You see, when I finished my bachelor's degree, I knew that I knew it all. And when I finished my master's degree, I knew that there was a lot I didn't know, When I finished my PhD degree in biblical studies, all I knew is that I didn't know anything. And I realized, I understood the wisdom of this man, that the more you learn, the more you discover that there's still so much to learn. And I try to apply that principle, that value to my life, especially with regards to the study of the Bible, because there's so much to learn in Scripture. You know, every time you open the Bible, even though you've read a passage or you've studied a passage many times, you go back to that passage and you discover, I didn't see that before. I didn't know that was there. How did I miss that? So many times that I've read it, how did I miss that? Well, it's because there's so much to learn. And I think when we approach life in general, but Scripture especially, with an attitude of there's still so much to learn, then that opens up all kinds of possibilities and potential for new learning experiences and for new principles that will jump out from Scripture into our lives. But if we go and we approach Scripture because we're pastors, we're ministers, and we've studied the Word so much and so often, and I've read this passage so many times, and I've even preached on it or taught it so many times, there's a very good chance that we're not going to learn anything new. I want to thank that man, Dr. John P. Newport. I want to thank him because even though he didn't know it, in that moment when he said there's still so much to learn, he helped shape the life of a young 24-year-old. It would take a while for me to understand exactly what he was saying, but I'm thankful that in his wisdom, in a casual, friendly conversation, him at 82, me at 24, he taught me there's still so much to learn, isn't there?